Israel continues their assault into Gaza. Yemen tried to attack Israel, and U.S. forces were hit 3 more times in Iraq and Syria by Iranian-backed militias. What's going on, everyone? Let's take a look at some updates as it relates to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. I'm recording this at 9 a.m. Central on Tuesday, October 31st, 2023. Overnight, Israel says that they conducted 300 strikes against Hamas targets in Gaza and Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon. As a result of that strike, Israel says that they were able to eliminate Nassim Abu Ajina, the commander of the Hamas Beit Lahia battalion. And according to the Gaza Health Ministry, who this information, again, is at the very least vetted by Hamas before released to the public, they say that 8,525 Palestinians have been killed, including 3,542 children, since the air campaign over Gaza commenced on October 7th. And they add that an additional 21,000 Palestinians have been wounded. Now, one little snippet of good news here, if we can. One Israeli soldier was freed during operations in Gaza over the past 24 hours. This was not a release. This was not a negotiated release. In fact, I haven't seen Hamas say anything about this. So they're not playing it up like they actually had a role here. What it looks like, news coming out of Israel, is that this was a military operation. They identified the location of this hostage, were able to go in. The hostage, who was an Israeli, or is an Israeli soldier, by the way, identified the location, were able to go in and bring her back safely to her family in Israel. So at this point, that marks the 5th hostage that has been returned to Israel. Again, we're looking at on or about 240 still being held by Hamas. The first 2 were American citizens, second 2 were elderly Israeli citizens, and then now we have the 1 Israeli soldier returned home. The Israeli ground offensive has continued into Gaza. From what we're seeing in terms of videos and pictures, it looks rather slow, rather deliberate. Lots of tanks, armored personnel carriers, engineering equipment, and infantry on the ground. I'll pull up a map here to show the location of where some of these incursions are taking place, mostly in the north and northeast and east. And they're still on the outskirts of major urban areas. So really have only pushed a couple hundred meters into Gaza at this point. Now, according to the Israeli Defense Forces, during the course of these operations in the last 24 hours, they say that they're able to destroy multiple Hamas positions, eliminated anti-tank guided missile teams, killed dozens of terrorists, and seized weapons across multiple locations. Now, I think there were some folks expecting kind of a rapid Israeli advance across Gaza. That's pretty clearly not what we're seeing at this point. But there are some pretty significant Israeli advantages to moving slow. The main one is logistics. Hamas and Gaza are under siege. They're completely surrounded. There's very little flowing into or anything coming out of Gaza at this point. So if you think about it from a purely military perspective, if Israel knows that they're going to have to end up at some point in house-to-house, room-to-room urban combat with Hamas, the longer that you can keep them from, obtaining new weapons or depleting their existing weapons inventory, and if you keep them from getting enough food, enough medical supplies, enough water, it makes that eventual task that much easier. So in that case, the longer that Israel is able to keep up this siege, the less effective Hamas will be when they eventually are engaged in direct combat. Of course, the other side of that is that it is not just Hamas in Gaza, right? You've got the many hostages across the area as well as the Palestinian civilians. But if you're watching Israeli media at this point, it's pretty clear that the overwhelming focus is the elimination of Hamas. The safety of the hostages, the protection of Palestinian civilians just do not seem to be a priority. That's just my read on it. Maybe I'm wrong, but if that is the case, you could very easily see a strategy where Israel just kind of sits on the outskirts of Gaza City for weeks or even months before actually pushing through. A couple other advantages here as well. It makes it very hard for another nation like Iran to draw a red line and actually act on that. If you remember a few weeks ago, Iran said that if Israel went into Gaza, they'd be forced to act. Pretty clearly, Iran is not going to launch an all-out war against Israel because they're a few hundred meters into Gaza territory. It just makes it harder for Iran to enforce those lines that they've drawn in the sand. And of course, it does keep open the possibility that hostages could be released through negotiations. It's more likely that's going to happen as Israeli forces sit on the outskirts of the city than if they were in the middle of Gaza City right now, engaged in room-to-room, house-to-house combat. Hamas has also put out a pretty significant amount of media related to these attacks over the last couple days. We've seen some graphics, videos, one of a Hamas fighter coming out of a tunnel to engage Israeli forces. as well as some pictures and quite a few statements put out by Hamas saying not only is the fighting ongoing, but adding that they have stopped Israel in multiple locations, that they've destroyed vehicles and have killed Israeli soldiers. Now, as it relates to battle damage assessment from this actual fight, really not getting much from the Israeli Defense Forces at this point. Now, in looking at what this fight could entail over the coming weeks, months, or even years, a major component are going to be the tunnels that Hamas has dug under all of Gaza. There's an interesting report put out by Israeli News Channel 12 talking to some Israeli experts that have studied these tunnels and kind of tried to understand what the Israeli Defense Forces will be up against as they enter Gaza. And a couple things worth noting here. They said these, over the course of the past 15, 20 years even, these tunnels have changed from just kind of basic smuggling routes to get things into Gaza to more of a full-blown underground fortress, right? They say at this point, the underground network beneath Gaza contains command and control centers, barracks, hospitals, warehouses, everything that could be needed to fight a war. They say it's an entire system of life that's been built underground. And I think an important aspect to consider here is that the tunnels are not just going to be an aspect of this fight, but the entire Hamas strategy for defending Gaza is built around those tunnels, right? It's not an afterthought. That is the strategy. And Israel is certainly going to have their hands full trying to figure out not just where those tunnels are, but how to actually clear them, recognizing that there's hostages scattered all throughout. Now, a couple weeks ago, a U.S. ship in the Red Sea intercepted multiple drones and missiles fired by Yemen towards Israel, and it looks like the Houthis are back at it again. So the Houthis are an Iranian-backed Shia militia in Yemen that essentially run the country now, and pretty sizable military force, all things considered. But overnight, Israel says that they intercepted a missile outside of their airspace, but headed towards their territory. And then the Houthis said that was our drone. That was us. We did it. So that makes it easy. Now, it's not clear exactly what was used here. Worth noting that Israel called it a missile. The Houthis said it was a drone. Entirely possible that this was the Shahed 136, right? So it's believed that Iran has supplied the Houthis with those, similar to, they supplied Russia with those for their war with Ukraine. The Shahed has a expected range, or an estimated range, of 2,500 kilometers, which means that the Yemen to Israel is technically in range. So the northern tip of Yemen to the southern tip of Israel is around 2,000 kilometers. So very well could have been one of these Shahed drones. U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria continue to come under fire by Iranian-backed forces. Since October 17th, there have been 24 separate attacks against U.S. forces in the region. There were 3 more noted on Monday, October 30th. Supposedly, rockets were fired at Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq, as well as the Green Village and Mission Support Site Euphrates in Syria. When asked about the Iranian plans here, or why these Iranian-backed groups, who are the likely culprit, would be carrying out these attacks against U.S. forces in the region, a DoD spokesperson says, quote, "Iran's objective for a long time has been to force a withdrawal of the U.S. military from the region. What I would observe is that we're still there." And just a couple days ago, the United States carried out strikes against targets affiliated with Iranian-backed militias responsible for the attacks on U.S. forces in the region. Gotta think more of those airstrikes are coming soon. Keep an eye out. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in national security subjects, be sure to check out these sit reps I put out on Substack. Link is in the description below. 7 to 10 of the top articles each week, along with a few podcast recommendations. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.